You begin to see these cyclical patterns in your life, and you're tracking how dissatisfying that is and how you want off of that roller coaster. You're done going around and around, not going anywhere. You find dissatisfaction in areas that you previously were perfectly happy. And all of this happens because you sense there's something bigger calling you, that the world needs more from you, and you want more for yourself.
Welcome to Questions Men Ask, the podcast for men who dare to question what is in search of what might be. Mold breakers, pioneers, wayfarers all, welcome. My name's John Symes. I'm a coach and author and a speaker here in California, and I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Jared Archbold. Jared, I'm struck by the fact that last week I went for a walk and recorded a story, and this week it's been your turn. Looks like you went off into the woods to find some reflections to share with us. Let's dive into those and then have a conversation about them.
How did you get to be the way you are? How did you become the man you are? What forces shaped that process? Let's start in the beginning, at birth. You come into the world a malleable hunk of clay, a sponge soaking up everything in, at first, a very close distance. And as you grow, things further and further away. Between the age of 2 and 3, for most of us, we begin differentiating between boys and girls. Become aware that there are ways we're treated differently, different expectations, different ways we see boys and girls acting differently, playing differently. We notice the difference in toys that boys play with and how different they are from toys girls play with. Colors that are associated with one or the other. Without being conscious of it, we model who we are on our father, on our uncles, the men of our family, potentially an older brother. And again, much of this time, we don't even have language for what we're taking in and absorbing. But it guides us. We learn by mimicking, by following the example that we see. We come into life with a sacred sensitivity, a particular part of us that is thin and can easily be wounded. And at some point in this early childhood phase, there comes a moment when that sensitive part of us is wounded. And in that moment, we have the thought, something is wrong here, or something is wrong with me. I'm not okay. Something in that vein, and it creates this sacred wound, this core wound that then shapes the rest of our life. It moves through all of the other phases of our life. And as we age and we move into adolescence, our sense of identity and where we are looking to orient and to learn about who we are expands beyond the family and begins to include our peers. We become very interested in what are the other people my age doing? How are they dressing? How are they talking? What are they interested in? What are they excited about? And we put less emphasis on what our family's doing and what they expect of us and what they tell us or encourage us or teach us. And this is a shift that will continue as we step into adulthood, but it's beginning in this adolescent period. And then comes along puberty. And hormones are moving. And our relationship to ourself, again, needs more. It needs more things we can hold on to, because all these new arenas are opening up. Dating, flirting, courtship. If you're a boy who's interested in girls, you enter into this whole new kind of relationship with the feminine, with the female. You become very curious and interested in the mysterious world of the female in a very different way than you have with the women of your family. You become very curious on how to communicate with them. And during this entire process, imagine you're in a costume room, and there are thousands of costumes of these different roles you could play, different ways you could express in the world. And you begin trying them on, testing, feeling, seeing how they feel. Am I an athlete? Am I a jock? Do I derive a lot of my identity right now from that passion, interest in my life? Or am I more of a creative? Am I a musician? Am I into theater? Am I someone who's really interested in bugs and the natural world? Am I passionate about dance? Am I like a kind of alternative, and I'm a skater, and I'm a punk, and I'm pushing against the status quo? There's millions of these identities, but we begin trying them on, and you can see it at school or wherever your peers congregate. There becomes groups, cliques that begin to separate. And you may be very clear which one you belong in, but you may kind of dance around and try different ones on. Which ones feel right? Which are resonant? You model yourself. This is a time where you start to look out at the culture at large. You become more aware of media, of music, of movies, of sports figures. And most likely you're looking to the men in those arenas and getting clues. This is a time where you may fall in love with the music of a certain band or musician and really be inspired by how those men express themselves, how they carry themselves in the world, or the way your favorite sports figure shows up in interviews, and the way that they demonstrate this mastery of expression through their body and coordination, doing just spectacular things. And then as you continue to age through your teens, you move into this early adulthood. And this is a time where, again, that awareness of self is expanding even further. And it's a time where that expansion is moving you further and further beyond your family of origin. You're much more centered, your center of who you are and where you derive belonging is more and more in the peer group and continuing to expand out into culture at large. And this is a time where there actually begins to be this pushing away from our family, this need to differentiate ourselves, this need and this deep curiosity to wander, to go out into the world with no clear destination, just needing to explore, needing to go have new experiences, be in new environments, meeting new people without our family involved. We need that fresh slate. And this is a time when we go away to school, we travel, we try on different jobs or career paths, we meet different people, and we do this, we explore the world. And it often is physically removed from our family. Not always, but often. And whether or not it's physical, it may be in our creative world, in our mind, in how we're expressing and moving through the world. And this is also a time where there may be a break with your parents, where there may be friction, where they are holding on to this mold of who you are and representing the family values, and well, your father never did it that way, or things like that. And that's where that tension gets created, because you feel the need to establish who you are separate from your family.
Jared, I love that story. And I know there's more to hear from you in the woods. We'll come back to that shortly. But you've taken us through the early stages of growth from boyhood through adolescence into early adulthood. Struck by a couple of things that you've mentioned there. I love this idea that we're trying on costumes, and we're doing that in our probably most in our teenage years. The
Yeah.
idea that we're trying to find an identity that suits us. And I'm fascinated to know what costumes you tried on when you were in that age group, in that phase of your life.
Yeah, I was definitely one of the kids who was a bit of a shapeshifter. I didn't quite. One costume just wasn't enough. I had to pull from a few, and so I was very athletic. I was really into a bunch of sports, but I also was a 4-H kid. I was like, raising pigs for fair and things like that. And then I was also very artistic. I was really into music and played a bunch of instruments and was into theater and all that kind of stuff. So I had a bit of a hodgepodge. How about
Mm.
you? What costumes did you wear?
Well, I was also very keen on sports, but the most interesting part of this for me is my relationship with authority.
Hmm.
And when I was a teenager, I was all my teenage years, I was at a school and my dad was also a teacher. And so there was a part of me that didn't want to be the teacher's son. There was a bit of me that wanted to be a rebel. So I had, and and yet, if I were to tell you the most outrageous and rebellious things I did, it's such small beer. It's inconsequential, that I um, that we smoked cigarettes or drank beer
Yeah.
underage. These are not
Yeah.
these are not in the greater scheme of things particularly rebellious. So I was trying to find this amount of rebellion that was enough, but clearly making sure it was also a rebellion that wasn't too much. So I
Right.
was like the look at me, I'm a rebel, but I'm not really.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
the costume would have tried to convey. And
Totally.
the other,
Safe rebellion. Safe
yeah,
rebellion within limits.
yeah. And the other costume I didn't get to try on was the boy that could talk to girls. I was at
Hmm.
boys' schools till I was 18. I
Yeah.
had little or no exposure to girls my age until I was like, yeah, 17, 18. And so I missed out a great deal on practicing that costume. And I think it's taken me a long time to catch up. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what comes to mind for
Well,
me.
yeah, well, I had the opportunity to talk to girls, and I didn't make very good use of it. And
Right.
what I did practice was not very effective. So, even though I had a bit of a head start, it didn't help a whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, girls were a
Yeah.
complete mystery to me.
Yeah. So I like that idea of the costumes that we're trying on. And I, I was also, trying to interpret what you were saying through two different lenses: the debate about how we grow as people and how we grow up to be who we are as men often revolves around the what's called the nature nurture debate. And so we think about the what we bring with us into the world, and then what is the effect of the way that we've been met in the world, the
Yeah.
conditioning that we meet. And I'm just curious to hear you speak about that and the way, yeah, what's the balance between those two forces as you understand it?
Well, I think they're in a dance, like you said, like we come in with our biology, with that nature, and then there's the environment we come into. And so how the environment is informed by biology, for one example being our family. Like we're born into a family, we're born with genetics, and then there's the culture of that family that we're born into. So they're in this beautiful dance and harmony with each other. Well, maybe it's not beautiful sometimes, but yeah, and especially looking at the nature and being born, as most of our listeners, as boys. And are we born with are we going to be tall? Are we going to be a big and strong man? Are we going to be a more slight man? Do we have, do we come into life with certain like genetic illnesses that show up in our life, and how that shapes us? And then we look at culture, we look at our family we're born into, we look at are they wealthy? Are they not wealthy? What kind of values do they have? What kind of ancestral wounding and trauma are we being born into, and how is that shaping us? And then, we zoom out as we look at community, the place we were born. I loved how connected in the last episode you brought the story to place and to the environments we lived in, the land and our relationship to it. And that's a huge part of it. It's probably less impactful for a lot of modern humans today. One suburb doesn't look a whole lot different from another suburb, but it still does have an impact. Were you born in a red state or a blue state? Were you born near the ocean? Were you born where there was a lot of forest? Were you born in the desert? They do have these very powerful impacts on us. Did you grow up in a religious community? And how did that shape your values and your perspective on the world? Were you able to watch much television? Or, and then also when you were born? I grew up and had, kind of into my teens, all of a sudden had access to the internet and had a cell phone in high school. And that was probably different from your experience. You didn't have those when you were at that age.
No, we didn't.
So interesting how those also really shape how that identity evolves and shapes.
Fascinating. And the other point I wanted to explore from what you said is the sense of what's innate to us when we're born. And yes, we do a lot of mimicking, and yes, we do a lot of assimilation of what we see around us. But is there a sense, we touched on it a little in the last episode, is there a sense of what's innate to us? What is our birthright? What do we bring into this world in terms of the qualities that we exhibit? So I'm curious about that piece too.
Yeah. Yeah. And what comes to my mind and what I'm really passionate about is studying and working with the soul, this animating force that is unique to us. It is our own unique relationship with spirit, and that it guides us. It comes to this life with this unique contribution it wants to give to life. And with that comes these sensitivities that we come into life with. And these sensitivities are places where we can very easily be wounded. And we see in these chapters we're talking about right now, that early adulthood, that adolescence, the early childhood, there's these sensitivities. We get wounded in these ways, and then they shape us and they guide us on this trajectory in life to walk in the world in a very unique way that's unlike anyone else. Even if it was someone else was born as a boy in the same social class, in the same place, right next door, and they had a very similar family, it doesn't matter, because we're each going to come into life with a different sensitivity, and we will be roughed up by life in very unique ways.
And that's my soul journey.
Yeah, it is.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm fascinated by that. I'm also interested to hear what you're going to say about later stages of life. So let's go back to that piece,
Let's
and
do it.
and then we'll have a discussion after that. Grant, thank you.
As you continue to age, if you're lucky, you step into the next phase, which is adulthood. And sadly, many never make it to this phase, because in adulthood is when everything you've been doing, all of this information you've been gathering, all of this looking out into the world and figuring out who you are and what mask, which costume in that costume room is the right one. And then in adulthood, you question all of it. It all of a sudden starts, maybe not all of a sudden, but gradually begins to feel inauthentic, begins to feel too small for who you are becoming. This is a time when that mold feels constrictive. The mold of your father and your family, the mold of your peers, of your heroes. This is a time when heroes come off the pedestal. And it's a time when the messaging from both the family, our community, and our culture begin to not quite add up. When we question, we push back, we poke holes in these things that we've never questioned before, but now we are. And it's a time of courage. It's a time of willingness to continue expanding when it doesn't necessarily feel safe, when it isn't helping to fill out a strong identity. It's moving beyond that. This is a time when soul rises to the surface, when your interest in deep authenticity, who am I really, without looking externally for answers. There's information, there's feedback to get from the external world, but you start turning inward a lot more. You start paying a lot more attention to what's going on inside. And when you do that, you also start to become aware of your wounding, of those traumas, and be they ancestral or be they from your lifetime. You become aware of how those are limiting you. You begin to see these cyclical patterns in your life. And you're tracking how dissatisfying that is and how you want off of that roller coaster. You're done going around and around, not going anywhere. You find dissatisfaction in areas that you previously were perfectly happy. And all of this happens because you sense there's something bigger calling you, that the world needs more from you, and you want more for yourself. There's this deep longing to contribute powerfully, to be of service. And so you start doing your healing work. You start meditating. You start doing yoga, journaling, working with a therapist or a coach or a guide. Maybe you do a medicine journey. Maybe you go on a vision quest. You start reading books you've never read before. You start connecting with communities and people that are on this same path. And I'm going to assert that if you're listening to me right now, if you've picked up this podcast, whatever brought you to it, I'm going to assert that it's the thread that flows from this adulthood stage, that you're interested in the mold that has been constructed for you by culture, by family, by peers, that is no longer a fit for you. That you look out at the world, you look out at how men have operated and continue to operate, the impacts that has on our women and our men, on all of us, on our non-binary friends. You experience grief. You actually let yourself feel the grief that is present, the impacts of how men have walked the earth. And you're interested in finding a new way, your way, something that feels authentic to you. And I encourage you to keep going. And I hope that this whatever this is, this monologue, I hope that this episode, I hope that this podcast supports you in that journey, in questioning, who am I as a man? And so this conversation has been about, how did I get to be this way? It's an important conversation, because it's only when we understand how we got here that we can start figuring out how we get somewhere else, because it's a different path. But it's important to actually honor how we got to be the way we are. So as I've shared these stages of development and these influences, be they genetics and biology, be they culture from family to peers and community to our media and culture at large, to soul And that spark of energy and awareness and spirit that brought us to this life, whatever those forces that have created the mold you find yourself in, look for the places where it's too small. Feel the tension, feel the discomfort where you feel boxed in, where you feel this natural desire to expand, to grow, and lean into that. That's where the cracks appear in the mold. And it takes courage and it takes faith that this process is going to take you to a beautiful place. And as a man who's on this journey with you and has been walking it for a while, I can promise you it's so worth it. Keep leaning into those places. Keep allowing yourself to expand and grow and to find your truth as a human and as a man.
Jared, I love it. Okay, there's lots to talk about from the second part of your story in the woods. And I must first of all go to the question which came up at the beginning for me. And you say that in this phase of adulthood, some of us never make it. That seems extraordinary. I'm thinking most of our listeners will be adult men. And so,
Yeah.
talk more about that one, please, because I know you don't quite mean they didn't make it into adult
Totally.
years.
Totally, yeah. I'm definitely drawing on a definition of adulthood, and I'm paraphrasing a bit from an inspiration of mine, Bill Plotkin, author and teacher. And I'm speaking of it more as a developmental phase versus a maturity of biology. So we can be an adult male, but not necessarily be in an adult developmental phase. And Bill Plotkin references a more ancestral understanding of adulthood, of like being an initiated adult who's clear on their unique gifts for the world and has been initiated by their culture to be a leader and to provide for their people, to be of service.
Right,
It's all about being of service.
right,
And yeah, and in our culture, there's a lot of this younger adulthood that's much more interested in surviving and getting what I need to be okay, and isn't able to make that transition to that more mature adulthood of being able, having the capacity to be of service.
right. And we have no practice of initiation
Exactly.
that is a threshold for us. I see.
Yeah.
So you're saying the life experience has not necessarily initiated all men into this final development phase of being fully adult. Okay,
Yes.
great. And so what's the essence of this final phase if we do arrive into it? How would I or a listener recognize, well, whether or not I was initiated, perhaps I have arrived in this phase of my life? Just give a
Yeah.
synopsis of that one.
Which which is how it looks for a lot of us as modern humans, is we're kind of self-initiating as best we can. We're kind of cobbling it together. But the symptoms are some of the things I named in the video, of like, we start really questioning things. The cookie cutter nature of like that mold that has been created for us of what it means to be a human, what it means to be a man, it doesn't fit. We can't make ourselves do some of the things we used to be able to do with ease. Certain jobs or roles we held just don't fit anymore. They feel incredibly inauthentic. And we start really questioning things, and we start getting interested in healing our traumas, and actually having some space in ourselves to be able to kind of pick our head up and look around a little bit and ask some questions, versus being just given by these wounds and these patterns that we're in. So we're ready to break those patterns,
This
get some resource, get some support.
this is fascinating because I came to the conclusion when I was sharing last week that we've reached an age of questioning.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that many of us and so I meant an age of questioning for everybody. This is an
Yeah.
age the age in which we are all living is an age of questioning the norms. And you're saying there's an age of personal development that many of us are finding ourselves in, which where the essence is questioning. So we've arrived. So questions men ask becomes ever more apposite as a title for this. So I noticed that, and then I also hear in what you said. I think back to the realization I had in my mid 20s. I was working for a big company, and they were very good at investing in training and development for us. And I was sent on a leadership training program. And the leadership training program I imagined was going to help me learn how to lead other people, but it was all about learning about myself. The entire program was about inner awareness. And I remember that I can almost distill the moment in which I realized I have agency over my own life. If I am aware of what's happening in here, or I can learn to change that. I have the capacity to change who I am. I have the steering wheel of my life in my own hands. And that was a revolutionary moment for me. Set in set in process all sorts of different things that different elements that have woven their way through my life. I hear a little bit of that in what you say in this phase of adulthood that you're talking about.
Yeah, the sense that I'm not stuck with who I became.
Right, right.
I have agency. Something else wants to happen here.
Yeah. All righty. Okay. And then let's just go back and make sure we're super clear about this idea that soul is emerging, or that I
Yeah.
can now hear my soul. What is it that we mean by soul in this regard? What is it that becomes apparent to me in this phase of adulthood that I couldn't quite discern in an earlier phase of my development?
Yeah. Yeah, and Soul's been along for the ride and is but the core interest or intention in those earlier stages is forming a really healthy, fleshed out identity, to have a strong ego and to make sure we know how to survive in our culture. So you see, kids going off to college or trade school or learning, a vocation and making enough money and maybe being able to have a family and all of these things. And then a moment comes where you've gotten good enough at the survival game, and soul starts having new longings and new whispers for you, is whispering in your ear in new ways. It's like, okay, like you played that game, you've gotten that handled. Now what? And these things that were not, they weren't things we were thinking about. They were not bugging us or tugging us or nudging us in certain directions, and now they are. Now what used to be a really satisfying life just kind of itches now. And this is where you see it, often we see these moments, especially in that like Saturn returns, kind of that late 20s, early 30s. We start to see this kind of like, well, I did everything I was supposed to do. I like went to college and I got the degree and I got a job and I met someone, we got married and we had a couple kids. Now, like, am I happy? This is what everyone told me to do. And I did it, and it's not, I don't feel what I thought I was going to feel. And then it starts a new journey.
This is really fascinating. So we've got an understanding now how any one of us has arrived at this point in our lives. What are the shapes? What are the sorry? What are the forces that shaped us in getting to here? And I see that in the tale from the woods, and it leads us to this place, which is a place of questioning, questing, exploration, which is only available to us as we reach this phase of development in our lives. And the hallmarks of this phase are that we're asking questions, we're breaking the mold. We don't want to assume that the mold we were poured into is fit for purpose. So we're questioning, we're testing, we're finding new shapes. And that is, and I mentioned it just a moment ago, but I'm going to repeat myself, that's a doubling down of the story of men that we told in the previous episode, that we've arrived at the age of questioning the norms. rattling the bars, breaking out from behind, throwing off the mold to find the shapes that are appropriate to us in the historical context. And then today we've looked at how important it is to throw off anything that constrains us in our own individual journey. So the place we get to is how valuable it is to be rethinking from scratch, to be re-examining what we previously took as the safe assumption that we could guide our lives by, to be questioning the mold I was poured into, to be questioning the narrative that runs around and surrounds our lives in the culture. We're right at the place we need to be able to take new choices. And I love the word re-choose, which I don't think I've ever found in a dictionary. I think it's a made up word. I think I'm one of the few people that use it. But the idea of re-choosing something is really powerful. So re-choosing says I'm going to take a moment to stop and look and review where I am and see what choices have contributed to where I am. And then I have the opportunity to re-choose. And re-choose doesn't necessarily mean change. In re-choosing, I might hold up a choice that I've made and say, that's a really valid choice. I'm committed to that. I'm going to continue to make that choice in my life. And we might hold up another aspect of our lives and say, that wasn't such a wise choice. I'm going to choose differently. But we get to re-choose, keep what works, change out what doesn't. And I think that's the moment that we're in. Yeah. And if we look at the sweep of the questions that we decided this first season of the podcast was going to cover, Jared, let's just review where we're at. We decided we'd look at where are we, and we looked at where are we for men at a social level and an individual perspective in the first couple of episodes. Drew some conclusions about that. The conclusions we drew are we're not in a particularly comfortable place as men for some very understandable reasons. Then we decided to take on the question, how did we get here, which we've covered in the last two episodes. One, the larger sweep, the historical context of how we arrived in a culture where we are now, which we have learned doesn't serve men or women particularly well. Today, we've looked at how we arrived in our own lives at this moment, where we have this wonderful combination of curiosity, dissatisfaction, and vision. I think I'm speaking for most people listening. Those three things are existing in some combination inside of us. We're going to go to the next episode, which is to explore what else is possible. Like, does it have to be this way? And we're going to dive into that. We're going to go to that episode equipped by this conversation that says the asking of questions is exactly what's needed right now. Challenging the norms, re-choosing what works, and re-choosing, making new choices to get rid of what doesn't work and replace it with something that will work. That's the moment we're in. So the next episode is going to be all about what other alternatives do we have? Yeah, Jared, what comments do you want to add into any of that about the overall journey that we're in?
Yeah, there's something about you were naming like the mold that we find ourselves in and breaking out of that. And it also came up for you, like the mold is sacred. There is a sacredness to like we ended up in this mold and it in itself has formed us. What we're learning in this re-choosing stands on the shoulders of that we found ourselves in that mold and that it shaped us in these interesting ways, that we were born in these families, that we are men, that we have lived the way we have lived, and how like looking at that and honoring it, and then okay, well, how does that kind of aim me in a more beautiful direction that really has my soul and my being shine in the world and serves my people? And I was really struck by that. It's not that we're just casting it away and shaming it and oh, that's just horrible stuff. We can be clear that it doesn't work for us, but that it informs us, that it has led us to this point. And it feels like an important thing to be sitting with and taking away from these 2 episodes of like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We got here, forces convened that we are standing where we are. We're listening to this episode. You and I are having this conversation, and that's all has its own beauty. And may that move us forward. May that support us as we find out what's next for us individually and as a culture.
Wow. Let me try that using some of the language you used earlier. So your soul's journey had you have to experience living inside the mold and realize the
Exactly.
limitations of it for yourself and for your place in the world, for you then to be able to move on to something else.
Exactly.
In that journey, the shape you were poured into, the parenting you had, the conditioning you had was all exactly what was needed to help you learn and take on a new, more effective shape in the world.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for that reflection. That's powerful. Nothing's wasted in this sacred journey.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we know where we are. We've explored how we got here, and we're going to look at what possible futures do we have. And we'll even beyond that, beyond the next episode, we'll dive into how do we get there. But for now, let's just give thanks for this particular episode and the questions about how we got to this place. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you have, please like us. Please subscribe if you haven't. Please recommend us to anybody that might be interested in joining this conversation. We'd really love you to do that. Please also have a look at the show notes. You'll find that there are resources there for enabling you to contact either of us if you wish to, or to come into the open forum that we have, the drop-in call that happens every month. You're able to come and join there. Find the details in the show notes. We're so grateful for your support, your listening, and the questions you're sending in to us. Thank you again for those. They're going to form the centerpiece of one of our next episodes, where we'll try and answer the questions that you men are asking us right now. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening today. I want to remind you that you can subscribe to this podcast wherever you found it. I want to remind you that we have a free drop-in. You'll find in the show notes a way to join the drop-in conversation with men from all over the world who've been attracted to this podcast because they've got questions to ask. And it's a Zoom call where you get to come and bring your questions and your answers, and we'll share wisdom around the theme of the particular meeting. You'll find the way to connect with that in the show notes. Please bring other men into this podcast. Spread the word, share the links, whatever you can do to have this conversation spread around in the world so that men get to ask more questions and find more answers. Thanks for listening.